third speaker this afternoon, and welcome once again to Eisenhower National Historic Site. Our third speaker this afternoon is Kevin Hymel. He has got, let's see here, Patton moves north, December 22nd through 26th, 1944. So this is a Patton talk, going to be a good one here. When the Germans launched their Ardennes Offensive on December 15th, 1944, Lieutenant General George S. Patton reoriented part of the Third Army north and attacked, reeling the Germans back. His dual offensives at Bastogne in Belgium and Echternach in Luxembourg, which I apologize if I butchered that, helped defeat the German drive. Kevin Hymel will follow the actions of the origins of the German attack to the Patton's triumph on December 25th, 1944. He will also debunk a few myths about Patton along the way. Kevin Hymel is a historian for Arlington National Cemetery, where he records events, ceremonies, and funeral services for future record. He is also a historian and tour guide for Stephen Ambrose Historical Tours and leads World War II European tours on D-Day and General George S. Patton's battlefields. He is the author of several books, including Patton's War, An American General's Combat Leadership, Volumes 1 and 2, Patton's Photographs, and Patton Legendary World War II Commander. He has served as the research director and writer for World War II History and World War II Quarterly magazines. His article, Fighting a Two-Front War, is being made into a Netflix movie entitled 6888, written and directed by Tyler Perry. Mr. Hymel is a technical advisor for the film, and Mr. Hymel is also a former historian for the U.S. Army's Combat Studies Institute. He has appeared for the History Channel, the American Heroes Channel, the Science Channel, C-SPAN, and Book TV, speaking about General Patton and military history. He holds a master's degree in American history from Villanova University. Let's give him a big round of applause. Thank you very much.
No problem. Be fantastic. Hey everybody, how's everybody doing this? Long time no see, right? I was the guy standing right over there. So I'm going to talk to you about General George S. Patton in the Battle of the Bulge. Has anybody seen the movie Patton? All right, okay. You remember in the movie when he, oh, we got a veteran in the back there.
Battle of the Bulge veteran.
Thank you, sir.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay. Now I'm really nervous.
He's going to check you now.
Please let me know what I get wrong, sir. So remember in the movie how he's kind of walking around with maps, and he says, the Germans haven't launched a winter offensive since Frederick the Great, therefore it's what I predict they're going to do. So a lot of historians have made reference to Patton's sort of prophetic abilities to predict the Battle of the Bulge. I'm going to now punch a big hole in that. Where that comes from, this idea that Patton predicted the Battle of the Bulge, and I'm going to point it out for those in you back who can't see it. This is Patton's diary transcribed by his wife for November 25th, 1944. And you can see it's got this line, "Furthermore, the First Army is making a terrible mistake by leaving 8th Corps static, as it is highly probable the Germans are building up east of them." Pretty smart, huh? You see the number 1 in the margin? If you go to the bottom of the page, for us historians who aren't smart, it says it was opposite 8th Corps that von Rundstedt broke through 21 days later. My God, George S. Patton has predicted the Battle of the Bulge. So, when I was writing my book, excited to write about this part, I actually looked into Patton's handwritten diary, and you know what? That sentence is not there, okay? Now, Patton did write a sentence like that. However, he wrote it on December 27th, which is the day after he relieved Bastogne. And if you look towards the bottom, you can see 8th Corps. And he says, the 8th Corps was static and right at the bottom there. So what his wife did is she took that sentence from December 27th and moved it back to November 1944, November 25th. So Patton, for as much as a military genius that he is on the battlefield, was not a prophet, okay? A lot of his corps commanders thought he had this amazing sixth sense for war because he was reading the enemy transcripts through what was called Ultra. And while major commanders all had access to this, Patton kind of cheated. He had his staff, his Ultra staff, draw up little hand-sized maps. And he would take them to his corps command. And they were like, sir, you can't take the information out of this tent. He goes, don't worry, I know what I'm doing. So he would go to his corps commanders and division commanders and say, you know what, I think the Germans might attack up there, their defenses are weak. And they're like, whoa, he's a genius. He knew how to read the cards, okay? So another element in Patton's prediction of the bulge is supposedly his G2, his intelligence officer, Oscar Koch, saw this build up in Trier, and oh my gosh, the Germans could attack. And so I was fascinated by this, that his intelligence officer is so good that he's predicting all this stuff. Well, I went to the G2 intelligence reports at the National Archives, and every day's report is about 26 pages long. Nobody reads that every day, okay? What they do is they read the conclusion. So the conclusion of every intelligence report that Patton read from November 25th to December 16th, the day the Germans launched the attack, concluded by saying the enemy is capable of defending and delaying, and going into the Siegfried line. The enemy is capable of doing local counterattacks. The enemy is capable of withdrawing, and the enemy is capable of reinforcing. Okay, nowhere in there does it say the enemy is capable of launching a 2-army armored attack at the American army. And, and then it has sort of like a conclusion of which ones they think are most probable. They repeat that every day. In fact, they don't actually repeat it. They actually go with, you see the bottom, it says, see U.S. Army G2 periodic report for December 14th. So they got so tired of repeating it, they just said, see what we wrote yesterday. Okay, so that's what Patton's intelligence report told him on December 16th, that all was well, okay? Last one real quick. Another thing that my mentor, Martin Blumenson, said is Patton was going to move his headquarters to a place called Saint-Avold, and he held off doing it. And Blumenson said, well, this is obvious evidence that Patton knew something was up and didn't want to move his headquarters. I'm like, oh, okay, there's good evidence. And then I did some research. The reason he didn't move in, his staff drove into the town. They were picking out buildings to move the headquarters into, and they saw this one on top of a hill. They said, that is an ideal building. The Germans put delayed fuse bombs in all the buildings as they pulled back. That is why George Patton did not transfer his headquarters, okay? So December 16th, 1944, the Germans do launch this very large offensive, now known as the Battle of the Bulge. I want to just notice two things. Let me see if I get this laser. No one has a cat, right? Because I don't want a cat jumping all over. Okay, I'm going to use my hand. See this? These are the shoulders of the bulge, all right? I'm going to come back to that, so remember shoulders. They launched this attack. Next slide, please. Using major armor. Now, in Patton's theater, they really don't use Tiger tanks or any tanks. They're using what are called Hetzers, which are just mobile artillery. The German 7th commander, when they were planning this, said, hey, I'm the guy facing Patton. He's going to react faster than anybody else. And they said, well, don't worry. We're going to give you a whole armored division to fight him off. And they didn't. So, and they were predicting him to turn things around in 3 days, by the way. So the person that really gets hit in the teeth is Troy Middleton, okay? He's a corps commander. Now, a corps is when you have several divisions, so you need a commander over that. And then when you have a few corps, that's an army, that's Patton. And then when you have a few armies, that's an army group, that's Omar Bradley. So he's the one that really absorbs a lot of this in the southern part of the bulge. And he is just racing units kind of into fire, trying to stall the Germans while we kind of come up with a counterattack plan and everything. So he's kind of breaking up armored divisions and sending them into the maw. When Eisenhower finds out about this attack, he really understands what's happening. and he orders Patton's 10th Armored Division under a commander named Morris to go north, and then the 7th Armored Division in the north to come south to start pinching it off. And he's going to send his 2 airborne divisions that are in reserve into this fight. Now, when Eisenhower tells Omar Bradley, tell Patton, move Morris's 10th Armored north, Bradley says, Patton's not going to like that. And Eisenhower says, tell him Ike's running the damn war. And so to me, this is really Eisenhower getting this, getting a grip on this campaign. When Patton hears about it, he complains. He doesn't want to give up 10th Armored. He thinks that Middleton is panicking, that this is just a minor attack. He contacts his other division commanders, the 4th Armored Division, the 35th Infantry, and says, guys, start heading south. I don't want to get caught up in this mess up north. So if Patton predicted the bulge, why is he running away from it, And so what happens is he calls Walton Walker, another one of his corps commanders, and says, I think Middleton's panicking. Go over and check out what he's dealing with. And Walker calls him back later in the day and says, no, it's much worse than we even imagine. And so with that, Patton starts to realize, okay, you know what? I'm not moving units south. I'm going to keep them in place. We'll figure out what's going on. And then, what do we got next? There's the 101st Airborne moving into Bastogne. And so what Patton's going to do is he's going to eventually meet with Middleton and kind of chew him out and say, what are you doing? These guys are going to get surrounded. And Middleton has to show him on the map that 7 roads go in and out of Bastogne. And Patton says, you know what, you're right. So Patton was magnanimous enough. He did appreciate his corps commanders underneath him. The 101st is not going to be under its commander, General Taylor. It's going to be the artillery commander, Anthony McCullough, because Taylor's been sent home. So he's really going to be in charge of this large endeavor. Now, Patton is going to go to Bradley's headquarters in Luxembourg City on December 18th. And basically, Bradley leads him in, and he's got a big map, and he pulls the curtain back, and Patton is shocked. He can't believe how big this campaign is. Now, the Germans at this point had not gotten a lot of depth into their attack, and this is an actual map for U.S. Army, but he could see how wide the attack was, and that's what really panicked him, that the Germans were capable of such a wide attack. Not worried about how deep it was, but just how wide it is. And Bradley, he hadn't slept the night before. He goes, where did this guy get all these troops? And he turns to Patton and he says, George, what can you do? And to Patton's credit, he doesn't hesitate. I can move 4th Armored up north. I can, move 35th Infantry, 5th Infantry, and just starts listing all the units that he can take out of the line and head north. Now, the reason for that, let me see what the next map is. Now, we'll get to that in a second. I don't really have a map for this, so I'll just say Patton basically has 2 corps that are fighting, okay? In the north is Walker, in the south is got General Eddy, Manton-Eddy. He's got another corps in the rear, 3rd Corps, under a new commander named Milliken, John Milliken. And Patton's plan is to have his 2 corps break out like this and have Middleton drive up the middle, hence his name. And so what Patton's realizing is, I've got this corps in the rear, I can just turn it north. That's the simple maneuver. And so that's what he's going to do. That's going to be the troops that are going to relieve Bastogne. So Bradley says, we're going to have a meeting tomorrow in Verdun with General Eisenhower to go over the whole situation. Patton drives back to his headquarters in Nancy, very far south, and he tells his staff, everybody get a good night's rest. He doesn't tell them about anything because in his logic, he doesn't want his staff up all night figuring this out. They're going to exhaust themselves. So the next morning he holds a meeting and he says, we've got this huge German attack. I need 3 options on how to counterattack it. And what they come up with is they can either pinch it off from the base, attack towards Bastogne, or hit it on the nose. And he assigns each one of those ideas a code word, nickel, dime, cent. So he says, all I'll have to do after they come back from this meeting with Eisenhower is pick up the phone and say nickel, dime, or cent, and this will tell my staff what to do. So with that, he heads to Verdun. This building took me forever to find. All of the locals did not know where Bradley's headquarters in Verdun was. I actually found photographs of it in the National Archives and was lucky enough that a woman at the Tourism Bureau, her father was stationed here. This is a French barracks. If you look to the far left, sorry about my dyslexia, you can see an American tank there. And that's how you can always kind of spot something that has World War II significance. They'll always have an American vehicle all over France and Germany, not Germany, but France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and England. In Germany, they're still there. So they're going to hold this meeting, and, Eisenhower asks for options, and Patton says, I can take an entire corps and drive north in 48 hours. And everybody goes, except Eisenhower. It says, I'm not buying that. That is not making any sense. You're gonna go up there in what are called penny packets. You're not gonna be able to attack with strength. And he says, well, if you give me another day, I can go with 2 corps. And so Eisenhower says, so it isn't 48 hours. It's 3 days that Patton's going to turn this army around. That's another myth from the movie. And so what are we going to do here? So there's Eisenhower, Patton, and Bradley, in case none of you knew what they look like. This is General Strong, Eisenhower's intelligence officer. And so he kind of briefs everybody about what's going on in Bastogne. And really, the feeling there before Patton speaks up is, let's just wait for the weather to clear so we can get planes in, see what's going on, and fight it. And Patton's the only one with a plan ready to go. And so when the meeting ends, he just gets on the phone and he says, nickel. And his whole staff knows what to do. Now, he's not going to return to Nancy. He's going to go into Luxembourg City, and he's going to spend the next 3 days driving around in a Jeep with a radio in the back with Sergeant Sims, his driver, with maps, coordinating this whole movement with his headquarters down in Nancy. In fact, when his headquarters troops make it up to Luxembourg City, he said, you guys are the biggest waste of taxpayer money. Sims and I have been running this army from a Jeep for the last 3 days. And I got to tell you, the reading about the change with Patton's troops, they've been fighting what's called the Saarland, which is very rainy, very cold, very miserable. They get out of their foxholes, start marching north, kind of getting warm. Luxembourg City is under a cloud of fear of German attack. They had red, white, and blue bunting out at all the buildings when the Americans liberate them. When the Battle of Bulge starts, all that bunting starts coming down. But when the troops of Third Army start crossing over these major bridges in the center of the city, it just changes the atmosphere. People are chanting, Patton, Patton, in the streets. And Bradley's headquarters troops, who were burning documents, getting ready to get out of Luxembourg City, they said when all these guys just started coming in with the Third Army patch, it just brought us all great relief. So the mood has really changed because of this movement Patton's making. So these are the troops moving from the Saarland up into the Bulge area. And notice there's no snow, okay? It's not snowing in the early parts of the Battle of the Bulge. That's going to come later. Those are guys with the 80th Division under General McBride. They're going to be part of the drive to Bastogne. So this is actually a Third Army map showing him pulling his units out of the line. Now remember I said Walker was in the north, Eddy's in the south, Middleton's sort of in reserve. Patton's original plan is to have Walker's troops turn north. They're the closest. But what he realizes he can do, General Patch, the commander of 7th Army, is going to move his troops north. So Patton's going to actually take his most southern troops out of the line and turn them north. So it's a much more complicated maneuver, but it kind of makes sense because they can pull out and get backfilled by the 7th Army. And so you can see all those troops moving up. Now, if you look right here, now, during the meeting, so they talked about Bastogne and everything, but one thing Eisenhower is adamant about is shoulders, okay? He knows militarily if you can hold the shoulders of the Bulge, you're going to channel the Germans. They won't be able to expand. They won't be able to threaten you in different ways. And so one of the first assignments he wants to do is take a town called Echternach. I don't want to fall off this thing. There it is, just north of Trier, okay? It's on the Saar River. And if he can take that, he's going to stabilize his front. And so he's going to move all his troops up, and the attack is going to go to Bastogne on December 23rd. So that's 3 days. Now he's got an armored division and 2 infantry to charge to Bastogne. He only has 1 infantry division and parts of the 10th Armored to get to Echternach. But he launches the attacks simultaneously. Well, The attack towards Bastogne goes off at 6:30 in the morning. The attack for Echternach goes off at 12 noon. And Patton is really worried about that one because the 5th Infantry has been fighting a lot. They've been worn down. These other troops have kind of gotten refreshed as they make the move up. And the fighting for Echternach is very intense. They start using a secret weapon we haven't used before called a proximity fuse artillery piece. So artillery hits the ground, blows up, or it can be preset. Well, these artillery shells use radar, so when they know that they're close to the ground, you can preset them. They explode in the air, so they're much more dangerous. And so the 5th Infantry troops are going to be fighting to get into Echternach, and the Germans are trying to escape over a bridge. The artillery is so effective, the Germans run away from the bridge and back into Echternach. And so Patton does launch the attack to Bastogne. It's roughly about 100 miles, maybe 75 to get up there. We're talking about McAuliffe is surrounded up there, right? December 23rd, 6:30 a.m., they launch the attack. 12:30 in Bastogne is when McAuliffe gets the notifications from the Germans to surrender. And he famously responds with one word. Nice. There you go. You guys get an A. But what people fail to calculate is he knows the relief is coming. He's in communication with Patton and Middleton through all of this. So I think it really reinforces his feelings like, no, we can do this. And unfortunately with George S. Patton, he's promising to relieve Bastogne in 24 hours, okay? That ain't gonna happen. But through this entire drive, he's gonna be telling guys, oh, I just talked to Eisenhower. I promised him we were gonna take it in 3 hours, hurry up. Kind of giving impossible orders. And it's kind of driving him crazy too, because he's not sleeping, he's over-focused. And he's worried Eisenhower's gonna fire him if he doesn't get to Bastogne fast. And in a way, the weight really is on Patton, because if he fails to get to Bastogne, he's the only show in town. Omar Bradley was in command of 2 armies, one of them stuck on the northern part of the Bulge, so Eisenhower gives First Army to Montgomery, the British field marshal, and so Bradley's basically commanding 1 army. But all the newspapers are Patton makes drive, Patton getting, pushing north. It really is all on him. So all the success and all the failure are going to be on George S. Patton. And at one point, Eisenhower calls him to check in, and Patton's like, dude, please do not fire me. I'm trying. And Eisenhower, what are you talking about, George? As long as you're moving, I'm happy. So that's some of the tension that's going on for this drive. So the push has been on for 10 days. So now you can start seeing the snow. This is the 26th Infantry Division, and I'll tell you what's really odd. They do a press blackout when the Germans attack. They're like, we gotta deal with this. We don't want to be really super open what we're doing. It was very hard to find any photographs of the U.S. Army on these days. From December 16th to December 27th, the majority of photographs that you see from the Battle of the Bulge were taken in January. But this was the only photograph I could find of Patton's entire Third Army making that break, starting to head towards Bastogne. That's the 26th Infantry Division under Paul. The veteran hasn't shook his head yet, has he? Okay. All right, we're good. So here is Bastogne. The 4th Armored Division, it's under a guy named Hugh Gaffey, and he is trying to push north, obviously. And one of his combat commands, armored divisions, instead of having regiments, they have combat commands, Combat Command A, Combat Command B, and Combat Command R for reserve. And the theory was that you'd always have one in reserve you could change out in combat. It never really kind of went that way. The belief is that the main drive is going to get in because that's a paved road. And the unit had already bounced up to Bastogne and come back earlier, so they kind of know their turf. Well, they're going to run into a bunch of German mobile artillery that's going to stop them. And these are the guys that have been fighting around the clock 24 hours. They're exhausted. And everybody thinks that they're going to get in on December 24th. Doesn't work. And McAuliffe, now I know there's this big thing that the 101st didn't need to be relieved and all that stuff. I'm sure you've all heard those arguments. McAuliffe's communiques during this time period are, hurry up, please relieve us. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. I mean, the Germans were really pounding. In fact, I've interviewed a number of 101st vets, and one of the medics I interviewed said that he and another medic were assigned to drive a truck around the perimeter of Bastogne, picking up all the dead bodies because McAuliffe didn't want the Germans to know how badly the casualties were on the American side. So that's just the intensity of the combat going on. So the main effort gets stopped, okay? Christmas Day comes and goes. On the 26th, an intelligence report comes in that the Germans are kind of flanking south to a town called Sabret, which is, and I'm not going to trip off the stage. No, no, no. Bing, okay? So, Combat Command R is heading to Sabret. The commander of the tank battalion is a guy named Craigton Abrams. Some nods, okay? And he gets to an intersection at Clochemont, and he looks up in the sky, and he sees planes flying over, bringing supplies into surrounded Bastogne. And he sees the parachutes start dropping out. He also sees planes dropping out of the sky as German anti-aircraft starts hitting him. And it pains him. And so he says, you know what? Instead of heading west to Sabret, why don't we just plow up this road and try to get into Bastogne? So I'm going to go back. He assigns this to a Lieutenant Bodges, and the main tank they're going to use is called a jumbo tank. And all this means is they've put extra layers of armor plating on the front. And the idea is this tank will absorb all the hits while the other ones maneuver. So there's a limited number of these. But he tells Bodges, he says, go get those boys in Bastogne. And with that, they head off. The tanks are going to head into a town called Eisenhower. That is the only town between where Abrams is and Bastogne is. So what they do is they call in an artillery strike on Eisenhower, and they've got an artillery guy in a Jeep that as soon as the tanks get close and the half-tracks full of armored infantry, they're going to call off the artillery, and then they'll rush the town. Well, the Germans hit the Jeep with the artillery guy in it. So the troops rush into a town that is being shelled, and it's just chaos, confusion. One of the soldiers, one of the armored infantrymen, will get out and knock out a number of German pillboxes and rescue guys from a burning half-track. His name, and I'm not kidding you, is Jimi Hendrix, and he will earn the Medal of Honor for that. Will never play a guitar as well, but earns the Medal of Honor. And so fortunately, a spotter plane is flying over and calls off the artillery. Now, during all this confusion and fighting, 3 tanks and 2 half-tracks are making it out of the town when a telephone pole gets hit, blocking the road. Abrams is going to be one of the guys getting out of the tank trying to wrestle this thing out of the way. So the entire attack into Bastogne consists of 3 tanks and 2 half-tracks, all right? Bodges' orders are just to race into Bastogne. So they're firing machine guns into the woods to the left and the right. Don't stop and fight. Get to Bastogne. And they're going so quickly, there starts to be a distance between the armored personnel carriers and the tanks because there's so many infantry guys in these armored personnel carriers, or half-tracks. So when the first 3 tanks pass, the Germans run out and put landmines on the road, and one of the half-tracks hits one. So now the entire attack is 3 tanks and 1 personnel carrier, okay? They come up to a pillbox, and Bodges throws about 5 shells into it. They kill about, he says 20 Germans. I've been to the pillbox. It ain't fitting 20 Germans. But he sees over in this field 2 soldiers, and they're like handling a bazooka, and he's really worried. So he points the cannon at him, and he says, Lieutenant Bodges, 4th Armored Division, identify yourselves. They don't say anything. And he says, Lieutenant Bodges, 4th Armored Division, identify yourselves. And this one guy stands up, says, Corporal Miller, 101st Airborne, damn glad to see you. And with that, at right around 6 p.m., Bastogne is relieved. Okay? They're going to be escorted into McCullough's headquarters. He will say the same thing, damn glad to see you. The Germans will make small counterattacks, trying to relieve Bastogne, to break the corridor, unsuccessful. But the German division commander was like, once they got to Bastogne, we were done. We were spent. You know, they didn't have tanks to block Patton. And so that is Patton taking Bastogne. Now, I'm going to cheat and go backwards. We talked about Echternach, right? So Patton, on December 26th, day after Christmas, he's waiting for reports on Bastogne. And he's not getting anything. And he's really panicking. But around 12 noon, he gets a report. 5th Infantry Division has captured Echternach. And he's so relieved because now he knows the Germans cannot cut off our attack into Bastogne. So Echternach is just as important in a lot of ways as Bastogne. It's just the battle no one's ever really heard about. But I always try to stress it when I talk. And so that town of Echternach, vital to the whole offensive because it's on a river. And so the Americans can defend that river. So Bastogne is relieved. Patton is happy. There's Bodge's tank, first into Bastogne. Has anybody been to the Army Museum at Fort Belvoir? So this tank is there. And you can see the layers of armor on the front of it. And that's Bodge's inside. What's next? Okay, so Bastogne's relieved. Now the armor starts pouring in. 4th Armored Division, 6th Armored Division. And they're going to start spreading out and fighting in the whole the perimeter of Bastogne as they expand it. And then on December 30th, Patton's going to roll up, okay? He's got meritorious crosses, Distinguished Service Crosses for both McAuliffe and this guy, I say Chipwee. I know there's about 15 different pronunciations for the name. John?
Chipwee.
Chipwee, thank you. All right, I cheated. And so what happens is he gets up to McAuliffe's headquarters, and McAuliffe is actually sleeping. And they have to wake him up to get him out here to talk to Patton. And they bring Steve over, and he gives them the medals. And they actually request, and the reason he's doing it is because on Christmas Day, the Germans launch an attack from the west. And he's the commander that stops that last major German attack into Bastogne. But they request Patton to drive slowly around the perimeter because so many soldiers wanted to see him. In one case, he rolls up, and there's these guys on the side of the road in a hole. He's like, get out of there. And what he doesn't realize is they had been exchanging machine gun fire with the Germans, and when the Germans heard the Jeep, they bugged out. So this is how close a 3-star general is to combat. He will also go watch a artillery spotter calling in artillery on a German tank attack, and Patton climbs up the hill, and everybody's saying, don't do it, don't go up there, but he does. And he's watching the tanks, and this captain's calling in the artillery. An artillery round goes right through the hole on top of the turret of a German tank, and it blows up. And Patton goes, great shooting, and leaves. And so that's kind of the end of Patton. And so then, Bastogne is relieved. There's going to be a lot more fighting to go on, so make sure to buy Volume 3 when it comes out. But, so that is really Patton and the Battle of the Bulge, the relief of Bastogne, the Battle of Echternach. No one ever has any questions about Patton. No one has any strong opinions, but I will take questions. Yes?
When you showed they could see up the airplanes going over to bring in supplies to Bastogne,
Yeah.
isn't that because that relates back to the story about Patton's prayer?
So Patton's prayer, which is in the movie, very famous, that was actually made for the SAR campaign. And when it says, please stop these snows that we're dealing with, that was changed for the movie. It was actually rain that he talked about. But he did have it issued for Christmas. Chaplain O'Neill was the one who wrote it up. But after, I think, December 22nd, the skies did clear up. And he ordered another 2,000 of those prayers issued to the men because he figured it's working. And when they had the meeting about creating the prayer, once they settled on all the language and everything, Patton said, how much are the men praying? And the chaplain said, not a whole lot, sir. And he goes, we need every man in Third Army praying. We need every fiber of every advantage we can get. So we need the men praying more. So Patton, for all of his, foul language, was a believer in the power of prayer.
We do have the microphone available as well, folks.
My father served with the 80th Infantry Division during the Battle of the Bulge. Where was actually the 80th Division staged between December 16th and December 31st?
So let's see. Let me get my cheat sheet out. Oh, because I know I saw 80th up there. Trace it down to Thionville. So they were stationed, I would say, in Thionville. Because, like I said, the 80th is part of 3rd Corps. They're going to be part of that breakout that Patton's called. It's actually called Operation Tink.
Point that out on a map again, please. Do you have a pointer?
Yep, right here. Thionville, 80th. And they go up through Arlon and up to the line, okay? You see this town here, Longry? Patton has to get to Arlon. He stops in Longry, and him and his staff march down this long hallway in a building, and there's a corporal at the end of the hallway reading a comic book. And he goes, oh my God, and puts the comic book away. And Patton says, I need a room to have a meeting with my corps commanders. So he runs into this room and doesn't realize Patton has walked right behind him. And there's guys sitting with their feet up on the table. And he goes, guys, got to get out of here. They're like, why? Who cares? And they all rush out of the room. And so at the end of the meeting, Patton goes back to this guy and says, how do we get to Ardennes? And so that's how he gets up there, because of this poor, frightened corporal just wanting to read his comic book. So, yes.
I know that movies affect what we all think of people during the war. You know, it's some myth involved. In the movie, there was a lot of interplay between Patton and Omar Bradley.
Correct.
And it's kind of difficult to understand who was stronger than who in that particular exchange. How was their relationship during this period?
Powerful, strong, because I think Patton really empathized with Bradley, because Bradley's very frustrated with Montgomery for not moving in the north. He knows he's been embarrassed by losing another army. So he basically goes into Bradley's headquarters at least twice a day. And there's one point where he comes in and Bradley says, George, don't even come in here unless you have good news. And they both kind of laugh about it. But Bradley's aide wrote about that, the bond that those two developed during the Battle of the Bulge. And so a lot of this talk about Patton being a rogue general and all this stuff, it just doesn't hold up to the research. You know, he's talking to Eisenhower every couple of days. He's talking to Bradley every day. And that's why this whole thing about him predicting the bulge, like, well, why didn't you tell somebody? You know, and Bradley even kind of addresses it in his memoir where he said, no one ever came to me and he didn't point the finger at Patton, but he goes, no one ever said to me that they thought there was a buildup or anything. You know, and I knew that was like trying to justify what Patton's wife made up, you know. Yes, ma'am.
The movie depicts it as well, but the methodology, the thinking here is that he was fired at the end of the war.
Yes.
And he really wanted to go to the Pacific.
Yes.
And yes, he did use, he spoke inappropriately, too blunt, and yes, he offended tons of people.
Yep. I do the same.
Why didn't they send him to the Pacific? Because he was heartbroken over that.
So, John, correct me if I'm wrong about this. They sent his name with a lot of other generals who requested service in the Pacific. And MacArthur took that list, took out Patton's name, sent it back and said, yes, we'd love to have all these generals. Yeah. What he really wanted to do was fight in China, because that, to him, that's tank country. You know, he didn't want to do the island hopping thing. But nope, that was not happening.
So it was because of MacArthur?
I would say so. John, nod or shake? You agreed that it was because of MacArthur that Patton?
It is MacArthur, but he only chose 3.
It was
Several.
Hodges, Bradley, and
Ridgway.
Ridgway. Okay. So, yeah. The Army's just like any other institution.
What about the conspiracy theories?
They're all false. But go ahead. Ask specifically.
Well, there were conspiracy theories that people wanted him dead after he agreed to stay in Germany.
Correct. So George S. Patton was actually killed in a car accident about 35 miles an hour. He was at a train crossing. He had gone out hunting that day, and he had a new driver. And while the train's going by, there's 2 trucks on the other side. And when the train went by, the first truck stalled, so the other truck pulled out behind it, was in the wrong lane. Patton's driver gunned it, then slammed the brakes, so they kind of hit at an angle. And no one's really injured, but Hap Gay is sitting next to Patton, one of his staff officers. And Patton says, I think I'm paralyzed, rub my fingers. So Gay starts rubbing his fingers, and Patton says, I said, I think I'm paralyzed, rub my fingers. And Gay knows right then he's paralyzed. So there's an MP captain, they call him in, they take him to a hospital in Heidelberg. They put him in traction. They actually take fish hooks and put them in his cheeks to counterbalance so there's no weight on his skull because he's got 2 broken vertebrae in the back of his neck. They fly a specialist in from Boston. His wife flies out there to be with him. They basically tell him the best he can do is semi-invalidism. Lots of people wrote him letters saying I had the same thing and I ride horses now. And they were going to send him home. They put him in a plaster cast to send him home, and he develops a blood clot and stops breathing because of that. So these conspiracy theories start. The first one was in the 1970s. A group of French communists said that that Patton had discovered all this gold in a salt mine, which was true. They discovered all the art and the gold in these salt mines. and that Patton wanted to give all the gold to all the people of occupied Europe who had suffered through Nazism. And Eisenhower said no, so he had to have Patton killed, which makes perfect sense. The second conspiracy, and this is, I think, Don Wilson's book. I actually helped him do a little bit of research before I realized what he was up to. He says, the OSS, the predecessor of the CIA, several OSS members had been captured by the Soviets, were in a Soviet prison. And Joseph Stalin contacts Wild Bill Donovan, the head of the OSS, who knows with the death of Roosevelt that Truman doesn't like the OSS. He's probably going to get rid of it. And so Stalin tells him, if you kill Patton, we will give you back your OSS agents. And, of course, this doesn't take into account that Patton and Donovan are pretty good friends. And so they get this agent to fire some kind of gas-powered thing that can throw a rock or a potato a certain distance. And it paralyzes Patton. They take him to the hospital, and the Soviets spray poison spray through the window to off him. So I went to the hospital, and I met with the hospital historian. Just before, the hospital was a U.S. Army hospital. It's now a civilian one. But they showed me the nurse call sheet. He was never without a nurse in his room, and they had to sign in and sign out, when they got relieved. So somehow that poison gas bypassed the nurse and killed Patton. So those are the two conspiracy theories about the death of Patton. I have never seen any piece of evidence backing any of this up. In the book, he says that Patton's car had a serial VIN number, the VIN number on the dashboard and everything. He gives the dashboard VIN number, and he goes to the museum at Fort Knox, and the car that Patton was in the car accident has a different VIN number. So, forces are at work. And so immediately I called the guy in charge of the museum. He's a friend of mine, Chris Kolakowski. And I'm like, what was he talking about? And he goes, oh, God, Kevin, we told him this when he came here. And when he explained it to me, I'm like, duh, everybody knows this who does anything with the military. In the military, if a vehicle is damaged in any way, they chop off the damaged part, find a new one, and attach it, and then give that vehicle to somebody else. That car didn't go into a museum after the accident. It was issued to another general. And he said, we told him this, and we showed him the different VIN numbers, and that's what he used for evidence of conspiracy. So, yes, sir. Oh, yeah.
After the Melody massacre, Colonel Piper's SS armor unit was heading to the Bulge, I understand. Did that ever get there?
So they were kind of the spear of the attack. They were sort of it was like a Panzerkampf group. So it was kind of like a specialized regiment with the King Tiger tanks or Royal Tiger tanks. And they're on the northern side of the Bulge. On the day that Patton relieves Bastogne, they clash with a unit called the 720th Tank Battalion. And it's at a curve in the road, so they're able to knock out two German tanks that stall the whole offensive. And by this point, they'd been so worn down and were so out of fuel that they pull back to a place called L'Église and then retreat from there. And so if you go to L'Église today, there is a giant Royal Tiger tank in the middle of the town, because when the Army maintenance guys came in to tow them all out, I think if I remember the story correctly, one of the local women gave them a bottle of bourbon to leave one tank so they would have something to remember the war by. And so that's the story of Piper and his Panzerkampf group. Well, that was a tongue twister.
Yeah, over here.
Yes, sir.
My reading of the history, it sounds like Eisenhower stymied a lot of Patton's initiatives. And if Eisenhower had just let Patton have his head, do you think the war would have ended soon?
I would say that is definitely how Patton felt. If anybody who's been in a leadership position knows that everybody underneath them has ideas and they think theirs are all right. Eisenhower had to consider all of Europe, I think Eisenhower and Patton early on, he got away from this, but whenever he criticized Eisenhower, he would follow it up, but I don't know anyone who could do a better job than he's doing. Now, once you do get to Europe, he does feel that, hey, I'm the winning guy. I'm the one rolling forward. I should, get the advantage. He just wanted to get to the Rhine. In my research, I do think that if they had shifted the supplies that way, he might have gotten to the Rhine River, which would have allowed all the other, armies to move up. But I don't know that for a fact. They were showing a lot of progress. In fact, I think it was the British Second Army at certain times were moving faster than Patton when they were getting around Paris. So yeah, I, like a lot of people, studied a lot of World War II through the Patton materials, you know. And then when I went to write the book and I had to start considering all other materials, because I think because it's in a book, you know, and the Patton papers were fascinating read, it's like, oh yeah, this is the way things are. But to step back and to consider all the factors, Patton wasn't always right. He was very aggressive. He knew what he was doing. He was an excellent Army commander. But Eisenhower, I think, did a lot of the right things because he had so many other factors to consider. There's a really good book on it called Patton's War you should read. That's my jerk answer.
I get the need to relieve Bastogne. That's pretty much self-evident. But once that was accomplished, why didn't they push north from, I think you said Echternach?
Right.
Why didn't they just push north from there and pinch off the bulge at the base?
So that's what Patton wanted to do, and he really lobbied for it. The roads were better in that area. But, and this is where kind of politics becomes involved, remember how I said that Bradley had been cut off from his First Army? Eisenhower said, you get First Army back once we snip off the bulge. And to Bradley, that was the fastest way to go to get First Army back. And that really frustrated Patton. He thought, no, the wise thing is to cut it off at the base. But Bradley said, no, we've relieved Bastogne, we're going to keep going that way. And it takes, you know, another week to get up. And Houffalize is not that far away, but that's the coldest part of the battle. For as cold as it was fighting for Bastogne, the temperatures really go below zero after that. And that's, like I said, you see all those pictures with frost on the rifles and machine guns and all the snow. Those are all January photographs. So yeah, that was Omar Bradley's decision because he wanted First Army back.
What kind of blowback, if any, did Patton get after the failed rescue attempt on his son-in-law?
Not enough. I just finished writing about that for Volume 3. That was the stupidest mistake Patton made during war. You know, there's the slapping incidents with 2 soldiers in Sicily. There's the Knutsford incident where he gets in the press. But this was the first real military disaster that cost lives. And I think Patton, there was actually an article in September of 1944 in Stars and Stripes. Patton's daughter wants him to save son-in-law. I mean, it was an open secret that Patton wanted to rescue his son-in-law. And, you know, if this was peacetime, he would have gotten cashiered out of the Army. In wartime, they keep guys that can screw up because they're successful on the battlefield. And by that point, Patton, having raced across France, having captured Metz, having, you know, relieved Bastogne, closed off the bulge, they were like, and when he did it, there was about a month left in the war. And so they just said, you know what, we're just not going to talk about it. You know, the tongue lashings Eisenhower gave him for those other 2 incidents, and this one was like, oh, we tried something, it didn't work. Yeah, it really was a stupid mistake. But I think if any other general had tried that, they wouldn't have gotten cashiered either. Like I said, there was a war going on. We got to keep our heroes. You know, they didn't talk about his mistress either. So, yeah, I don't think he got the punishment he deserved. It bothered him the rest of his life, though. It tore him in half because he said, here I was trying to. So Patton is getting near a POW camp. And all indications say that his son-in-law is there, who was captured in North Africa. And he decides, and he tried to gray and vague this up, he decides to launch an armored attack to race behind the German lines, get all these guys, bring them back. The men beneath him, the corps commander, Mantonetti, leaves his headquarters, says, I don't want to even be here when Patton comes to talk about this. So he leaves his chief of staff in charge, and Patton blows, where is he? And he goes, he's not here, and he told me that whatever you asked for not to do, sir. And so he says, get me the division commander. Now, I talked about Gaffey, the head of the 4th Armored Division. He had been promoted out. They had a new commander named Hogue, who actually captured the most famous bridge over the Rhine. He's been in command for about 2 days. And Patton orders this thing. He doesn't know what to do. Now, of course, Creighton Abrams, we talked about, one of the combat command leaders, says, I'll lead this attack with a combat command. And Patton says, no, you will not. This is a quick in and out job. This is going to be a company of tanks and a company of infantry, 100 basically. And so Patton weakens the force. He gives it no air support. It's called Task Force Baum. It's under command of a guy named Abe Baum, and I've interviewed Abe, or I did. He's passed away. And I talked to him about the lack of air support. Like maybe they had planes, and so they get to the POW camp, but it takes a lot longer than they expected because the Germans fight them the whole way. They try to leave at night, and the Germans have figured this out, and they're surrounding him, and they stop his tanks. So he says, "Okay, it's sunrise. We'll blast out of here." And just as they're starting the tanks up, all this artillery and direct fire comes in. They have to surrender. And when they reached the camp, Patton's son-in-law was accepting the surrender with the camp commander from the commandant and going out the gate to meet the troops, and a German shoots him in the lower abdomen, like chips his Cossack's bone and all this stuff. They rush him back into a hospital, and a Serbian doctor saves his life. So Patton writes in letters in his diary, I almost got my son-in-law killed trying to save him. So I know that tore him up incredibly. So, wow.
Additional questions? All right, our final talk of the day will be at 2:30 this afternoon. Guys, thank you once again for joining us.
You've all been great.